She has exhibited her work in many cities and many countries, in the UK, in Australia, among others, and of course in Pakistan. And her work is very much focused not only, but also on performance. Here in her biography, you will read that using performance as an instrument, her work deals with private and public day to day, as if it were a place where social values are declared and challenged. Welcome, Rabbya, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for having me over, and not just inviting me, but doing everything to get me here, because visas to Portugal for Pakistanis are closed for an indefinite period of time. So thanks to the organizing team for getting me here. Until the very last minute, we didn't know if I will make it. So yeah, that. Just give me 1 second to put this on. All right, so I am somebody, like Julia introduced me, who makes art, teaches art, writes about art, now curates art, eats, sleeps, dreams, lives art. And you can tell that this is my first time playing with the animation on a PowerPoint, really, yeah, and it shows. But these various practices that may seem different are not so independent from each other for me personally. In fact, they're very, very interconnected, and work, a material entity, is only a byproduct of lived experiences in my case. And they're all of these practices are premised on a fundamental question, and that is, what is the best way of saying what I want to say? And what I usually want to say is, what does it mean to be me? Sorry, as conceited as it sounds, my work is just about being me. And this thing that, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the presenter just before me, the one with Alberto. Antonio, and how he was talking about love and self-care to understand love, and self-love before you can love another person. So I feel like that's kind of true for me, as embarrassed as I am to admit that, but it's so much about self-love. So I will be sharing with you today these byproducts of lived experiences. Sometimes they're gestures that perhaps qualify as art, debatable. Then I will be sharing a curatorial project with you titled Promises to Keep, which is essentially performance, self-portraiture, questions of identity, women, all of that. We'll get to that. And then I will be sharing a chapter from this performance archive that I am currently compiling. It's performance art from Pakistan, and I'm developing an archive of sorts for it. So as romantic as it sounds that there isn't a clear distinction between my lived everyday life and my art practice, it's actually very, very unhealthy, because you're continuously, constantly making work or thinking about work. And the people who live with me find it very, very, very problematic. So in order to sort of address all of these things, what I want to begin with is a letter. And on the first day, I think yesterday, somebody was asking about imposed intimacy. What does it mean when intimacy, I think it was you, imposed on you? I don't know what it means, but you'll experience it just now, because I'm going to impose intimacy on you. And so you will notice in this work also, whether it's work, it's debatable, and in other works also, that this question that I have, that what is the best way of saying what I want to say, is usually sort of, the aim is to find that perfect harmony, that perfect sort of, to have the content and the form in sync with each other, so that they become one inseparable, which eventually then, in conclusion, makes me an interdisciplinary artist. And that is also very, very problematic when you're an artist and you don't have a medium that you work with. So yeah, sorry, before I begin to complain too much about my art practice, we should move on to the letter. I want to make a small request. I want this letter to remain ephemeral. So it's okay to live stream it, but if you can, later on when you're putting it on the website, if you can edit this part out. Dear you, I've been struggling with this letter for some time. It takes a lot of effort on my part not to keep writing to you again and again. I also know that there's no point in writing to you. We both continuously misunderstand and misinterpret each other's written and spoken words. I love you and I've hoped against hope for us to work out, but sometimes the more you try, the worse you make it. And I wonder if love has anything to do with it. I tell myself I don't have to hate you to leave you. Maybe I have to leave you to keep on loving you. And I tell myself that won't be good for me. Suspension of disbelief is not my forte, and walking away has never been harder, and maybe love has nothing to do with it. Perhaps you and I, and here I'm consciously not using the word we, both desire the same kind of intimacy that you and I cannot allow. Or perhaps you and I interpret intimacy differently. I will never know. Every time you use that word to talk about the lack of it, I wonder what it means. And dictionaries are extremely limited, so I try and visualize it to understand its meaning. The word intimacy is so fragile that one even has to speak it with care. The movement of one's tongue and lips and how much you open your mouth has to be so cautious, as if the word was made of glass and will break if you were to open your mouth too much or too little. Even a slight warping of the mouth could crush it between the roof of one's mouth and soft tongue. The gentle C at the end reduces it to almost a whisper in one's ear, as if it were meant only for you. On the other hand, the word intimate, whose T's are like the sharp edges of a broken glass, one has to tread with care, or else it will cut your feet. My attempts at any intimacy between us makes you extremely uncomfortable, and I know it. I know how you hate confrontations with the sharp edges of those broken glasses, those broken pieces of glass, and I know it. While I like to hold those pieces against light and wait for magic to happen. I'm sorry for knowingly hurting you. I'm sorry for that unhealed cut on your big toe that stained the carpet in the living room. I have always wanted to embroider the shape of that stain in a bright colored thread on that carpet. I also want to embroider the other stains on that carpet. Did you know that I have kept a very meticulous record of each stain with dates and timings and what it is a residue of? Events that you and I are the only witnesses to, but of course our recollections are different. I want to embroider all those shapes accompanied by a key to read this map. A different color for each stain. Maybe I will still do that before I leave, and love perhaps has nothing to do with it. You and I began this journey with the promise of nothing but intimacy. But when is this promise fulfilled, and how does it manifest itself? Was it our desires or was it our fears that destabilized the structure that is meant to contain this intimacy? What are the structural parameters that govern this intimacy we had promised each other? Is this intimacy more effectively performed in the syntax of language or in the arrangement of our bodies? I wonder which of the two languages I know better describes what you and I desire. Is there a word for intimacy in Urdu? Ulfat is not intimacy. It's love or compassion. Kurbat is closeness or nearness. Perhaps Hamnawai is closest. It literally translates to in harmony. Or Ham Ahangi, that implies similar sounding syllables or being in tune. I just noticed that the closest words both have the prefix hum, meaning we or us. And so perhaps that space in between us, you and I, is missing a hyphen, the sign that indicates that the two words have a combined meaning as well. The intimacy that transpired between us in the absence of that hyphen remained largely an encounter with one's own self. The way a certain piece of music pulls out a certain emotion from deep within, and that emotion is uniquely personal, almost like experiencing the sunset. The meaning of what you're feeling is not in the thing, nor imposed by you, but somewhere in that encounter, which is time and space bound, and love has nothing to do with it. With love, R. So this letter that I read to you just now is currently part of a work that's on display at this bookstore in Chiado, that's how you say it? Chiado. And this project is called Undelivered Mail. And the first time I did it was in 2017 for an exhibition, for a group exhibition that was opening on the 14th of February. And it was a Valentine's Day, and so I decided to write these very intimate letters, and people, if they liked, they could take away one with them for free, and leave after they have drawn out the shape of the letter and put a chit to replace the letter that says claimed. And here, when I was, and these letters are sort of one-offs. I write them every time, and they're written on a typewriter, so there's no editing, there's nothing. And so when I was asked to redo this work for the space here in Lisbon, and I knew I was coming here for the conference and whatever else is going on in my personal life, so all of this sort of automatically came together, and the research that I'm doing with performance art and my practice and so on and so forth. And to my surprise even, it just came together in the letter, which is why I thought it would be sort of, it would make sense to read it here. And nothing else about them. But this intimacy, this sort of desire to share these very intimate letters with general public, with strangers, is also sort of displayed in this work that I did in 2013. It's called The Live Letter. And this was in a gallery in Masquerade. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. But I was sitting in my studio in Lahore, and for the entire duration of the opening, which was 4 hours, I was trying to write a letter. And I was writing it, rewriting it, editing it, rewriting it. And the audience in the gallery space could watch me do it because my screen was being shared via Skype. And so I don't know if these letters are real letters, if they are art, if they are this bodily desire that compels me to write them, to share this with everybody except who they were initially addressed to. And this performance of intimacy, this idea that we've been talking about since yesterday, is also something that this work deals with. It's called Dropping Tears Together, and this is in collaboration with Hurmatullain, who's my collaborator since 2007. And we have our independent practices and we have our collaborative practice also. And in this work, we, for this iteration of it, this was done at our apartment in Chicago where we were both studying. And people were invited to our kitchen where we were chopping these onions. And the kitchen was very small and the door was kept closed so that when people enter that space, they start to cry automatically. Tanya Bruguera maybe got inspired by this project. I like to believe. So anyways, so the idea was to sort of, and how yesterday Catherine was also talking about how when you cry, even if you are not crying because you're sad, it makes you sad. So while we were crying and the emotions that we were going through, and it was essentially a silent piece, but as a trampoline, if Hurmat and I felt the need to talk, because this was 5 hours long, and people could, in 2s or 3s maximum, were ushered into our kitchen and just watch us do this and cry with us. And if we felt the need to talk, we were supposed to share a story with each other, between the two of us. And they automatically became these intimate, sad stories because we were crying. I don't know if it was intentional or, yeah. Another version of it was performed at a gallery in Sydney, like this, where it was sort of like a very small room. So the room has to be very small for the stench to accumulate and for it to sting your eyes, so that when you enter, and people who were not brave enough for the sting stayed outside and watched us from the outside, while others just sat there, cried. Not all of them cried, of course. The first time this project was done was in 2007, which was the result of a workshop that 6 of us, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. It was a workshop where we shared. The workshop was to sort of explore how to this amalgamation of autobiography and fiction in storytelling and in creating intimacy. And during that 2-week workshop, we automatically ended up sharing, I don't know why, just sad stories. And so this was sort of like a task we decided to pair with those stories because it goes with it, because Onion's sort of making you cry and people who are entering the space are crying, and so to add to the drama of all of it. But it wasn't theatrical, it wasn't decided, all of it was very impromptu. To show you more examples of works that sort of address the theme of this conference, this is a work which is called Casual Leave, and there are 6 digital prints. And this was when, in 2008, I was going to leave for my master's, and Hurmat, my collaborator and my friend, we didn't know if she was going to join me later because I got the Fulbright scholarship, she didn't get it that year, and so there was going to be a gap of, I don't know how long between our friendship and our collaboration. So we decided to do an exhibition which was called Fly Away Peter, Fly Away Paul, and this was one of the works in that show. And for this work, because Hurmat and I had spoken so much about wanting to go on a vacation together, these are heterosexual women. This is their friendship only. And a lot of people who came to the exhibition called them honeymoon pictures, which is why I thought it made sense here, these pictures. So we never took that vacation, and we got these clothes stitched that were the same print, but in 2 different colors, sort of like to reinforce that sisterhood, because I don't know if that happens in other countries, but in Pakistan, mothers dress up both their daughters in the same print to save the headache, to go look for clothes, but in just different colors. So we got these clothes stitched, got our manicures, pedicures, wore this red lipstick, and went to a photo studio. And this is the photographer's, the man at the studio, his aesthetics entirely. We just went to him and told him, he didn't know we were doing art, we just told him that we want to go to these places that should look like vacation spots. He chose them. And nobody should be able to tell that we never went there. And so these works were displayed in a gallery accompanied by postcards that Hurmat and I had written to each other. And the title of the work, Casual Leave, is borrowed from a story which is written in Urdu, which was written by a friend's mother, and I don't know if it was ever published or not, but it's called Achanti Chutti, and Achanti Chutti literally translates to casual leave. And in that story, she's writing an application to her boss, saying that she doesn't want to come to work, and she doesn't make up a reason. She just says, because the weather is so nice and it's raining, I just want to sit by the window and watch the rain. And that's it. And that it's written very beautifully. So the title was borrowed from that. I can skip this. This is a work which we made for an exhibition that was being curated to celebrate the first death anniversary of the governor of Punjab, who was killed by his own security guard in the name of blasphemy. So Salman Taseer, who was the governor of Punjab, was in 2011 shot by his own security guard because Salman Taseer was trying to sort of negotiate with the government that this blasphemy law that we have in Pakistan needs to be revisited. He wasn't saying it should be sort of abandoned. He was just saying that we need to revisit it because it doesn't make a lot of sense, and a lot of innocent people are in prisons because over personal disputes also, people are making it into a blasphemy case, and all of these innocent people are in prison, etc., etc. And so his own security guard thought that this was an act of blasphemy to even question the blasphemy law. And so he shot him, and this is where he shot him. This is outside a restaurant, and his car was parked just next to this tree. And when we were asked to make work for this exhibition, Hurmat and I sort of thought a lot about it because in this day and age, we have become so desensitized that no amount of blood or death does anything for us. So Hurmat and I were not sure what our response is, like how do we want to respond to this work? So for the entire day, from morning until sundown, we just stood there next to the tree and did nothing. We were just these passive spectators or perhaps witnesses. And this tree was sort of like a monument because all the images of his death, and even at his death anniversary, this tree was, it sort of became sort of like a monument of sorts because people left flowers here and his car was parked right next to it. So there was, the blood splash was also here, so on and so forth. So we wanted to use this site and we just stood there and we still didn't know what the work would be. And later on, when we had this video documentation of just standing there, we decided to, in the gallery space, we decided to have a separate video for each azan time, which is the call for prayer. Azan is called for prayer. And so for and there's 5 prayers in a day, and so for every prayer time, there was a different video shot at that hour. And when you went to the gallery, and let's say you went at 2 p.m., and it was time for Zohar prayer, you would only get to see the Zohar video, which would only play for 2 minutes and a few seconds at the time of the azan. And if you went at a time when there was no call for prayer, you wouldn't see the work. And here I have an example of one of the videos. It's not playing, Johan. Oh, it is playing, but there's no sound.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة.
Oops.
حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح.
I'm sorry that the frame was a bit weird because I didn't realize that in this PowerPoint there's a much zoomed in version of it, so you couldn't see a lot of detail. You could see the road. We're standing, the camera is across the road from us, and the cars that were passing by, there was a police car, and so those things added detail. And the other thing was that because the camera was on autofocus and the light was changing throughout the day, the camera went in and out of focus. And I am showing a very sort of like a low-res version of it here, but the original video it was still out of focus, but we didn't mind it so much. Although it was not a documentation of the performance, the work was in the form of a video. We were very aware of this. But the out of focus bit and so on and so forth, we didn't mind so much for this work. This is a work which is called Speech is a Gift, and this is also probably up at the bookstore, probably. We don't know. And this was a response to my 2 years of living in the US, and how I was asked to repeat myself. Now I think I have sort of like acquired an American, British, Ethiopian, Falana, after all these years accent of living in these countries. But at that time, I went straight from Pakistan, and probably I had that Indian accent. I'm not entirely sure if I had it or not. Sorry, no offense. But so I was asked to repeat myself a lot. I would go to a grocery store, ask for capsicum, and they didn't know what capsicum was. They'd be like, what are you talking about? And then it turned out to be bell pepper. And even when I said bell pepper, nobody would understand what I was saying. Same thing in Portugal also. But anyways, I became very interested, and it didn't make me feel shy or anything. It's just that I was curious. I was interested, because America is that place where all of these people from all these other countries live, and so what's a big deal? You should be used to hearing all these accents and so on and so forth. And then I met this girl, Monica Nicolai, who was at the same university as I was, and she was in the writing department. And she used to teach English to foreigners, English as a spoken language. And she told me about this line in a book, in a 19th century British grammar book for children, that said, speech is a gift of God, and the habit of speaking correct English next to good morals is one of the best things in the world. And I thought it was fantastic. And with my legacy as the colonized by the British subject, it just worked beautifully. So I asked, and Monica had a very, very American accent. God was God, and so on and so forth. So I asked her I recorded her saying it, and I repeated after her, and this is a video.
Speech.
Oops. What am I doing?
Speech is.
Speech is.
Speech is. Speech is. Speech. The habit.
Is a gift of
Speech
God.
is a gift of God.
And the habit of.
Speech is a gift of God, and the habit of speaking.
Speech is a
Gift of God, and the habit of speaking. Correct. Is a gift of God, and
the habit
is one of the
best.
Speech is a gift of God, and the habit of speaking correct English
next to good morals is one of the best things.
Things.
Speech is a gift of God,
And the habit of speaking correct English,
next to
good morals, is one of the best things in things in.
So I'm not acting at all, and at that time I wasn't even making work. So like I said, material entity, work, is only a byproduct of lived experiences, and a lot of times I am consciously sometimes I'm using the structural sort of elements to make it art very consciously, and sometimes I'm just doing it. So for example, this one, I hate to admit because I'm probably now selling this video, and it's not so nice to say that I didn't even make it as art. It'll bring the value down. But I wasn't actually making art. It was an exercise that I was doing, and then this video was sitting on my computer forever, and then before I showed it as a video, I then performed it live in a gallery space, once in Islamabad and once in Stockholm, and then after I had performed it live, I became more comfortable showing it as a video. And in the live performance, you encounter the very large projection first, so you almost think that it's a video work, but then when you go further, you come across this woman who's sitting with a camera facing her, just filming her mouth. And this is a 5-hour, 6-hour long performance where I'm just continuously sort of doing this. What is this? Why? Okay. My animation again. The curatorial project that I promised to speak about is called Promises to Keep. And again, this is from that same time period where I'm living in the US as a Fulbright scholar who has this responsibility to safeguard and present the best of Pakistani culture, but also not be very conservative and sort of mingle in with the Americans and be more liberal and all of that. And at that time, I was sort of continuously, because of an identity inscribed on my body and in my accent, I was asked this question a lot: where are you from? And my answer, Pakistan, would start an involuntary, superficial discussion on terrorism, extremism, Islam, and treatment of women. And the last question would be, don't you feel liberated in the US? And well, yes and no. And so I was very dissatisfied with these exchanges. And not dissatisfied in the sense that I felt sort of introverted or none of that. I'm too shameless, like I don't get embarrassed very easily, so none of that. But it got me thinking about things such as, So it was a text in 2010, and later this became a curatorial project, going back. So it got me thinking about all of these things, like the production of an image of an identity. How is that image of an identity produced? And then what is our responsibility to those with we share an identity? So for example, I remember shaking hands with a man who was a lawyer, and he tells me that Muslim women are not supposed to shake hands with men they are not related to. And I was like, okay, thank you. And then how we perform or represent these identities. So I perform, and what does that say about me? And my identities, they're always in plural. So I became very interested in that question. I still am to a great deal, and I feel like all of my artistic practice is this about the overlap between all of these identities that I play: the woman, the artist, the teacher, the collaborator, the lover, the friend, the sister, the daughter, etc., etc. I'm very interested in all of these roles that I play. And so Promises to Keep was sort of an examination of the close relationship between self-portraiture and performance. And this was something that has been spoken about in other presentations also, this idea of looking at yourself in the mirror, where you're the subject, the object, the author, the person who's looking at the image also, so on and so forth. So self-portraiture and performance in the construction and representation of identities was something that I was very interested in at that time. And I began to sort of write about how self-parody, activism, popular culture, nationalism, and feminism cross paths in the works of performance art by female artists from Pakistan. And this text I wrote in 2010 and just sat on my computer forever. And then in 2017, it became a curatorial project, because later on I looked back on it and I realized that it was less of a sort of like a writing project and more of a curatorial project. And so 13 artists, or I'm forgetting 14 artists or 12, don't know. They were brought together in a space And these artists are from 3 different generations. So for example, here you have Bani Abidi's Mangoes, Salima Hashmi's Handa Ubalna, Amber Hamad's Virgin Mary. I can't go into the details of describing this work. I had planned to, but that won't be possible. But this was a skit that Salima Hashmi had made in the 1970s for the television, and this was political satire, and this was during the time of military dictatorship, and she's sort of criticizing the state and the state-run television and through the use of humor. And she's telling you how to boil an egg, but she's not telling you how to boil an egg. She's talking around it. She's telling you about everything in the world except for how to boil an egg. And she breaks a dozen eggs during the process. And Bani Abidi is talking about, well, we don't really have the time to go into the details of all of that. Maybe if we do, and during the discussion, if you're interested in this work, maybe we can come back to it. This was another work that was in the exhibition, Air Hunger by Meher Javed, and she's talking about this very existential sort of human thing, the breathing. And she's breathing into a pair of goat lungs, and she's counting her breaths. And again, no time to go into the details of it. This was a work that was also performed live. This, the one here, Great Sacrifice, which was by Hurmatulen, the person who's also my collaborator. And this is a video of her embroidering goat testicles. And it's paired with a recipe of how to cook goat testicles. It's a delicacy in the Pakistani cuisine. So goat testicles mixed with kidneys of the goat, chopped, and I've never had it. This one was performed live in the gallery space. That is Aisha Jatoi, where she's, these 2 works that are put together, the one where she's folding white laundry and the one where she's washing red laundry. These works were both made 10 years apart. And I had requested for this exhibition, I had requested the artist to put them together as a 2-channel video because I felt that they were in dialogue with each other. So that one was made earlier, the one with the red laundry in 2006 and this in 2016. That one where she's drying her red laundry on a fighter jet plane, which is sort of like a monument of victory in war that we sort of stand very proudly next to and get our pictures taken. So it's really a monument of violence, in her opinion. And so she's drying her laundry on it. And here, this was a response to an attack on a school where 134 children were killed. It was a terrorist attack on a school of very, very young children. And she's folding white children's laundry and nothing else. That's her. So she's sort of kind of with this seemingly unthreatening womanly task that she's doing. I feel like it's very, very powerful, and it's a criticism of what we celebrate and lament as a nation. This is how the works, some of the works looked in the space. This is, of course, not all of the works. And what I had done was, here in some of the images, you can probably see, does it have a laser pointer? I'm becoming very tech savvy. The red thing. Okay, after animations, I'm pointing lasers. So this orange text, this fluorescent green text, this pink text, here text. I had paired each work with a takeaway text for the exhibition as a curatorial gesture. Now, I don't know what are curatorial gestures and what are artistic gestures, but I just felt the need to put those takeaway texts together with the works because so for example, for Hurmat's goat testicle video, I had paired it with the story of Abraham's great sacrifice from, I think I pulled it out of the Quran, and in which it's a very masculine story. And her wife, who's the child who's being sacrificed, is also her child, but she's sort of absent from that story as a mother. So I put that story next to Hurmat's work to sort of talk about the context of the work. And also some works I paired with writings by fiction or poetry by male Pakistani artists, writers, literatis, to sort of say that these are not concerns of women. So for example, Bani Abidi in her work is addressing her this is Bani Abadi, her national identity, because she has family in both India and Pakistan, and she straddles the border, and she talks about that, the border, a lot. And so I paired it with a piece of fiction, a story by Saadat Hasan Manto, which talks about the border and the partition through the use of satire. So this is not just a concern of women in that country, but men also, and how they're addressing it and how she's addressing it. So, and then there were other works where I had put text by female artists from across geographies to talk about how women's autobiography is not geographically specific, and the concerns are similar. So this is not just the concern of Pakistani women, but women. So for example, with this work, that video, White as Snow, I had paired it with Faith Wilding's performance text, Waiting, where she's rocking back and forth and reading the Waiting monologue. And then I began to I began to archive performance art, for the lack of a better word. Archive sounds too big a word, too heavy. My shoulders are not sort of strong enough to bear the weight. But for the lack of a better word, I'm compiling an archive of sorts for performance art that's produced in Pakistan. And as I started to do that, the question of what qualifies as performance? What do you put in that archive? Is it only work that has live actions, or the artist is present, or is it all experiential art without the presence of the artist, like work that is with text and light and experiential, and other things also. So text is also performative for me, very, very performative. So in order to do that, I hosted these, this is one of other tea parties that I've hosted, where I invite, this is called Playing Tea Party, and I invite, this is a collective exercise to talk about performance art by the means of performance, and taking the shape of a roundtable discussion. It's meant to invite archivists, researchers, art historians, curators, basically people who are involved in the production, distribution, collection, documentation, and conservation of performance art. Utilizing the format of a live broadcast, the participants revisited, reflected, and simultaneously acted out questions about the very nature of performance art within the digital age. So it wasn't really a performance, it was a roundtable discussion. But when we come to a roundtable discussion as experts on what we do, we already come with a script. And so it was almost a scripted performance. And we gathered around a table which had a toy tea set. And we pretended to have tea, and I served only water in it. And this was, and the question, what makes something performance sometimes is the presence of a live audience. So if I was reading my letter in my studio by myself, it wouldn't really be a performance, but perhaps it became a performance here, we don't know. But anyways, so the question of the audience, we couldn't have live audience for a 2-hour roundtable discussion. What would they do? So then I thought of having a live YouTube broadcast. We still had audience. We still didn't know if anybody was watching us. Maybe 2 people were watching us. Maybe no one was watching us. We don't know. But the idea was to sort of work with the idea that there is a live audience. And this is a screenshot of somebody's computer as they were watching the performance sent to us. And these people who were invited, so for example, one is a curator. Thomas was a curator. He's written a book on performance art in China. Marianne Huschlach was, she's a dramaturg, and she was working on a book by a performance artist based in Glasgow. And Christian was a curator / artist who employs performance in his work. And Akashia and Eva were people who had done their PhDs in one aspect of performance art or another, and they were working as curators and historians. So these, what happened? Oh, the animation again. Sorry, I keep forgetting that I have an animation going on here. So this archive is called Performative Gestures. Maybe the name will change, I don't know. And it's across genders and across themes. And so I'm just going to quickly list all of the things that I'm trying to address in that archive, but I'm going to talk about only one of these things. There's not enough time. So after the challenges of archiving the undefined experience, like what is performance, like I said, the undefined experience. Wait a minute, where are my notes? Yeah, so performance art resistance to definitions and the challenges of archiving the undefined experience. Perhaps, I want to think that it helps us to make performance more than the sum of its component parts. So it's not just live art, or it's not just bodily art, or it's more than the sum of its parts. So I want to think about the Gestalt understanding. Rethinking spatial relationships between the art object, the artist, and the viewer/participant is very important for performance art. But these days, we have started to talk about all art as experiential art. Like, we no longer say, even for painting or sculpture, we no longer talk about the art object. We talk about our experience of the art object, which is why the role of the curator has, in the last 15 years, become very, very important. We didn't know of very many curatorial residencies, but now there's those things also. So the role of the curator who orchestrates that experience for you has become very important. So all art has become experiential in that sense. So how do we, so this is another thing that the archive tries to address. So blurring of distinctions between art and everyday life to question clearly defined categories, and how that helps to broaden the concept of art and its function, i.e. affect. The everyday, both as a place, both private and public, as a domain in which social values are asserted and contested, and how in the sort of the curatorial project that I shared with you, this was also an important thing, that this work that employs the language of the street, like the language of the common people, it's not like art, sort of tries to talk about the everyday and the art as a domain in which those social values are asserted, challenged, contested, practiced, reinforced. And I'm also very interested in this idea of the real versus the representational. We say that in performance art, the blood and the sweat and all other bodily fluids are real. But I wonder, like, I don't want to go into the details of this right now because we don't have time, but I wonder if it is real or the representation of the real. The moment something becomes art, it becomes a representation of reality and sort of like a step away from reality. The thing that I want to talk about is the role of the witness to explore the notions of truth, perception, and intimacy in archiving this undefined experience. So the role of the witness is super interesting because I am collecting conversations with all of these artists. The way I'm archiving this is that I'm collecting documentation from them. I am collecting conversations with them, video, audio, and I'm transcribing them since 2016. I'm continuously like transcribing those conversations. And I'm also collecting witness accounts, testimonies of witnesses who have experienced these performances in flesh. And I'm trying to have at least 3 witnesses for every performance. And this was, these are some of the witness accounts paired with the documentation of the performances. This is about 9 of them. That was shown at the Karachi Biennale in 2017, because the title of the Biennale was Witness. And it sort of, the work made sense there, so I showed it there. And a lot of times these artists don't have, so for example, Rashid Arai described me a performance, and he said, I don't have any documentation of it. And then I was like, so what, did it happen? Like, doesn't the document make it art? Without the document, what do we do? So I kept thinking about all of these things. It's almost like if we have this proverb in Urdu, and I'm sure there's a version of it in English also, which I know, but I like the Urdu one better. It says that if a peacock dances in the middle of a forest and nobody saw it, did it dance? That sort of a thing. And so the role of the document, the residue, and then sometimes, like I briefly talked about in my work also, that I'm very conscious that the documentation is the work, or it's only a document of the performance. So that dichotomy, that what remains is that. And a lot of times we experience performance art secondhand through the documentation. So this is something that interests me, and I'm collecting it. Lastly, to talk about where this interest in the role of the witness is coming from, I want to end at this project, which is called the Crow Effect Project. And my interest, perhaps, in the witness is coming from here. And in this project, Hurmat and I, so basically this project is called the Crow Effect Project because, it's a silly idea, but when a crow perches on the roof of your house in the Pakistani culture, or maybe in all South Asian cultures, it's a sign of an arrival of a guest. And so it's called Crow Effect Project. And Hurmat and I, every time we're in a foreign country, we invite one complete stranger over for a 3-course Pakistani meal. And we started doing this at our apartment initially. And then later we were invited to do this in galleries. So for example, the picture on the top is from Icon Gallery in Birmingham. And that picture is from India, and so on and so forth. But initially the project was done at our house, where we would send out mass emails to friends, and they would send out mass emails to their friends, so that we get one person who is a complete stranger, who doesn't know anything about us. We've never met him, her, and they come over for a dinner. And it's like having any other person over for dinner at your house. You clean the house, you cook, you wear nice clothes, you buy flowers, none of this is orchestrated or directed or scripted. We just have the guest over. And the idea is to offer total, complete hospitality. Sort of like what we were talking about, polite, sort of like politics. And we do this every time we're in a foreign country, meaning that we change the power relations ever so subtly, even if for a few hours, by becoming hosts in a country where we're otherwise guests. And I'm not saying that the host has more power. Sometimes the guest has more power. But how those power relations play out, and then there is 2 against 1. Hurmat and I are 2, and there's 1 guest. So we like to sort of think of this, and this is sort of, this is very generous of us that we're doing this, and so on and so forth. So the work has this it's very consciously political in that sense. And these are napkins that are printed with the sort of like the title of the work. And so we don't document. This picture that you're seeing on the top is taken by the gallery. And when we do it in a gallery, small information that's important, we ask for a room that's enclosed and has a glass window, so people can watch us but can't hear us. So it's a very private, intimate dinner that we're having in a gallery space. And we personally don't document the work in the form of photos or videos or audio or whatever, nothing. We just get this kind of a picture taken with our guest, and we ask for a post-dinner email. And that's the only documentation of the work. And we, together with such a photo, we have these emails as sort of like the memory of the work. And some of these emails talk about the conversations we had. Some of them talk about what was going on in their head. And they're very, very interesting. Like, I find this is the best way so far of documenting this work, because the emails are more than often very, very rich. And even if there are people who never responded to us, there's a blank email. Because we asked for a post-dinner email and they never replied to us, so with their photo. So I'm reading one from Carrie to end the presentation here. It says, "Dear Rabbya and Hurmat, sorry to be so late in responding to you. First of all, thank you very much for having me for dinner, the last of a long line of dining strangers. Second, thanks for getting in touch. I was afraid if I was going to have to track you down over the internet or via the Icon Gallery to thank you. 3, in trying to track you down on the internet, I saw a photographic still from White as Snow, which I had seen a few weeks before and I liked very much. I wish we could have talked about that. Is it available to see online anywhere? And 4, thoughts on dinner with you too. I wonder how much of what really happened, what we talked about, is in my head now. How much has changed and how much is changing, and how the memory of that evening will eventually set, or will it always be shifting? I told my wife about your dinner project, and she was really worried for you two, inviting strangers at your house. But I think it's great. I'd rather trust more than trust less, even at the risk of being conned or harmed. I remember Hurma telling me of recreating a picture of her sitting on her father's lap. I remember Rabbya telling me of smoking outside the Chicago Art Institute, making up stories about herself to strangers she spoke to, and wondering where art and life stops, and I wondered if there ever is any real difference. And I talked a lot. I now wish I had talked less or not at all, and only asked questions about the unreliability of memory, about 9/11 and how unreliable the memory of it turned out to be. Why didn't I ask about what Crow effect means? What does it mean? How long is it possible to listen to somebody else and not disappear? We are, I fear, always telling our own story, and if we don't keep telling it, we vanish. I've been thinking about that a lot since dinner with you two. If I had asked more questions and listened, would I have disappeared? One step further back, and we surely fall into the abyss. We all disappear. Carrie. Thank you.
Does it work? Yes. Thank you very much, Rabbya. That was a very interesting presentation, and I have to say that personally I was very moved by the first and the last letter. So I'd rather open directly to questions to the public, and then get back if in dialogue with what you have to ask and what you have to say. Any comments, reactions, observations, everything? Yes, Alberto. You have to push on the red one.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. I have to admit that I didn't know your work before, but I was really moved. I really appreciated how you seem to be trying to also in a very modest way, to question all of these. You were putting it predetermined categories or predetermined differences, and you do it relentlessly in almost every of the every one of the pieces. You're trying to do one of these works somewhere, category work, and at the same time I think it was strikingly in contrast with both the two letters and the two ideas of the two letters. One that you were emphasizing about how much everything that you were going to explain was about yourself and about your love for yourself, and then this kind of vanishing point at the end. And I think that in a way that must be also performance, because I think it wasn't so much about yourself in a way, or the way I encountered it, it wasn't so much about yourself. You're vanishing, but you're not vanishing because vanishing is not a problem. No? So I wonder if you could say something about this this kind of contrast between the love of yourself, the vanishing, and this constant questioning, which is not about yourself, but is about those things that are outside you.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that, which is why, because I can't answer those questions for myself, I perform them in my everyday life. This question, this thing that you're spot on, that this thing where I say I'm a very conceited woman, but am I, and so on and so forth, and the idea of the self-love, yet. But I don't know. I feel like my favorite people to talk to are strangers. So I sit at coffee shops and buy people coffee in exchange for a story. I'm somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, but I just do that in exchange for stories and in exchange for these. I don't know. I sound like a very sort of like a lovesick puppy, but am I, and so on and so forth. So I'm aware of it, but I don't know. So how I behave in my everyday life and what I make in my artistic practice is sort of one thing. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sure it doesn't answer your question. But yeah, which is why I perform it instead of, sorry.
Any other questions? Yes.
Maybe you hear me like this, I don't know. I'm curious how your curatorial work that you showed us, just one example, what did it bring to you? Because it was quite an invasion as well in the work. I don't know how you did it or what it learned you, because it was an experience, like you say. What did it bring for you?
Lots of bad reputation because I did a very stupid thing. So this exhibition was at Apex Gallery, and I don't know if you're familiar, but Apex is this gallery in Manhattan in New York, and smack in the middle of the city. Everybody comes there, and they do this unsolicited proposal program. So you send your proposal without your name and without your bio, and they just judge the proposals. And 3 top proposals get to have an exhibition and a budget to show in New York. And so when the proposal got selected, I was very curious as to why it got selected. You know how it played on these sort of cards? Identity, women, performance, Pakistan. In America, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not being self-deprecating here, but I just want to understand if it's the quality of the proposal, I wanted to understand, or if it's these things. You know how institutions want to be all-inclusive, they want to show more people of color, or homosexuals, or disabled people. So almost all of these things have become a disability. Like, so for example, somebody is going to give you an extra favor for, so I don't know. I mean, there's an extra seat for people with such cards. So I was very interested in wanting to address that through the exhibition. And I tried, I thought of many ideas, and eventually what I did was, which was like, I shot myself in the foot. I was given the budget to host 3 events a week after the opening of the show. And I invited women who live in New York, are women of color, and work with autobiography. And autobiography and identity and how they represent this identity in their work is at the core of their work. So for example, a stand-up comedian plays on, like, their work is about their identity, mocking their own identity. And so a stand-up comedian was invited, a curator was invited, a writer was invited. And this writer on her website, and she writes about her Nigerian Bengali identity, and even on her website, the excerpts that are read from her book are read in a Bengali accent. Now, if a white writer was doing that, you would say that's such a racist thing to do. But authority, and I wanted to address all of these questions. So I invited all of these people, and I didn't want to be sort of dismissive of their practice at all, because I'm doing the same. I wanted to, in a comfortable, safe environment, wanted to address these questions with them, that in this day and age, are these questions still relevant? Or my second question was that this, for people of color or people from third world countries, is this sort of concern to work with identity, is this a choice or is this a given? Like, they have to. Because when they're confronted with the other, do they automatically end up making work about this, so on and so forth. So I invited all of these women, and I wanted to address these questions with them, and I asked them if this was still relevant in this day and age. And they were very, very mad at me. They wanted to eat me alive in that roundtable conversation, which was open to public like this. And it was, again, a toy set party. And I was in my sort of play mode. And they were very, very upset. And they're like, you have a very white man's perspective, and what do you think you're doing? And you seem like a very privileged woman. I don't know where you're coming from, and so on and so forth. And I respect that. I know the kind of hard work that they've done, and because of their hard work, I am showing at places like Apex. and in cities like New York. But I was just trying to ask if it is still relevant. And the other question I was trying to ask, like I said, was that if it's a choice to work with the subject of identity, or if it's sort of imposed on us. But it went down very badly.
Thanks a lot.
So that's what it brought me.
Sorry, something I didn't understood is the archive you're making of Pakistani women art is made in New York or in Pakistan?
No, sorry, I was talking too fast, probably it didn't register. The women performance artists working with the idea of identity is a curatorial project that I did in New York in 2017, which was a text that I wrote in 2010. And this archive is of performance art in general that I started putting together in 2016. I started researching in 2016, towards the end, in December. Okay. And when I started, there were very few people who were doing performance. And I was like, oh, this is not going to be such a big deal. But now, as performance is becoming so, I mean, it's a bandwagon that everybody wants to board. And even artists who don't make performance works are doing demonstrations of how they make their work in gallery exhibitions and calling it performance. And so it's become impossible to make this archive because people are starting to do carnivals where just stuff is happening and they're calling it performance. So it's become really impossible, but that's what I'm doing. So that's a separate project. Yes.
Alexandra.
I would like to know if you have I would like to know if you have an idea of like what is the most relevant piece of intimacy that you put outside that actually had an impact on public space?
I don't
know if you're understanding the question.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. For example, I can speak only from, I have a very bad memory. So I can speak about just immediate past. And that is when at the bookstore, I'm telling everybody this story because it just recently happened and I am so, like, I can't contain myself. So these letters that I'd written, and we wanted to do it at the bookstore because we wanted to work with incidental audience and so on and so forth. So, and they're in a window. And Leva, am I saying your name correctly? Was at the bookstore, incidentally. And she didn't talk to anybody. She went to the window. She read the instructions that she could take away a letter. She knew exactly which letter she wanted. She was not confused at all. There was one letter that spoke to her. She very confidently went, traced it out on the window, removed, put a claimed chit on it, packed it in an envelope, and was on her way. And when I asked her, which one did you take? And the way she replied was very interesting because she didn't say, I don't know how much I can reveal here, but she didn't say in which you are talking about this. She said in which you are fearing this about me. So she made it a letter that was addressed to her, and in that moment I was like, whoa. So it did what it was meant to do, and it was rewarding when somebody engaged with the work that way, where they instantly received, not only claimed the letter, but sort of received it. And that was I can speak about that one right now.
I have a question about your use of language, because I'm always, I enjoy very much when you speak publicly because you use humor in such an interesting way. You play with language. And I feel that as a spectator, I've been present to your talk today, but also to previous talks. And I'm very fascinated by how, when you talk, you use humor in such a clever way. So it has to do with you playing with language. But at the same time, when you use the letter, which seems to be an important kind of format for you and in your work, language is used in a much more poetic way. So I think it's very poetic, and it has a kind of, when you were reading, I was thinking that it was as if you were reading from, from a novel. the way you use it in a very literary way. So I wanted to ask you about this different way of using language in different moments.
I am totally, like, this is the biggest compliment I've received in my entire life. That A, my clever use of humor, and B, that my writing is poetic and it sounds like a novel. God. Whoa.
I hope someone recorded this.
I hope so. Because that's what I sort of continuously struggle to do. And this letter was, to my surprise, because this was the first draft, I have done very little editing, because this was the only letter that I then copied onto my laptop for the presentation,
Yes.
because all the others were just typed on a typewriter for this bookstore display. And to my surprise even, because I think I'm so sort of, I try and make these, I'm interested in the connections between the various things that I do and that are around me, that I was pleasantly surprised when it tried to speak about my practice, the sort of like embroidering, wanting to embroider the stains on the carpet. Like, I was pleasantly surprised that that came through me.
Yeah.
And it spoke about love and intimacy and language. And whether intimacy, like, because for me, it's in language, and for this person that I'm talking to, it's in touch, and so on and so forth. So I was trying to do that. And then it spoke about a very private sort of experience, and then it related to how performance is experiential and very subjectively experiential. Like, not everybody has the same experience when they walk away from a performance. So it brought all of these things together, and I was very pleasantly surprised. But the other thing is that I'm unashamedly going to admit that I struggle to express myself in words, and I find writing impossible, and I find speaking also sometimes impossible because of the two languages that I know, Urdu and English. I'm not well versed in either of them. I don't know which one I think in. I don't know, like, I'm not completely comfortable in either of them. And when I have to write, so a lot of this, so there's this thing I used to do a long time ago, and maybe a lot of those letters still have that. I used to copy sentences and phrases and expressions that I read in places. And this was when I was very young, and phrases that I wished I had sort of said or sounded like my thought or something like that. And I would copy them, and I would write them in pencil and then erase them and rewrite them sort of to forget where they're coming from and to make them my own eventually. And so these letters that are at the bookstore, I get very uncomfortable every time I have to display them, the two times that I've had to display them, because maybe they're not, like, even in this letter, I noticed that in the last paragraph, which is a little bit like academic jargon, I'm sure I read that somewhere. And so this question of authenticity that we were also talking about yesterday and all of that. So yeah, hence performance.
I think that is the fear of everybody writing, that sometimes you write something and you don't, maybe you have read it somewhere else and you don't remember, and you're not crediting the person who wrote it. So,
but I've completely made them my own now.
Yeah.
And this other thing, I think there's this writer, Matthew Goolish, who was also a professor at the Art Institute of Chicago. I was never his student, unfortunately. But he's written this book, which is called 39 Micro Lectures. And I'm in love with that book. The way he uses language. And I felt like when I was writing this letter, I felt like I was trying to copy his style of writing, although I wasn't consciously doing that. The thing about intimacy and the sound, because I almost, when I say the word intimacy, so I always have to be conscious about how much I open my mouth and how much, all of that. So it came to me through that experience, but it also came to me, I think, from reading Matthew Goolish, that I'm totally sort of blown away by the way
I'm
he
also
writes.
blown away. I remember seeing a show by him in Paris a few years ago, and I was so blown away that I wrote him an email, and he replied to me. So I was very,
Yeah, it's beautifully.
Yeah. Any other?
And sorry to sort of add to that, this thing about writing, which is why the other work at the bookstore, which is borrowed phrases but footnoted to make my own narratives, the fractured narratives piece. These are footnoted, but I'm trying to sort of construct my own narrative. So whether they're mine or sort of,
There is another question.
You said you're not sure if you're better at Urdu or English.
Yeah.
Which language do you dream in when you go to sleep?
So people ask that often. I don't know. Visuals?
You dream in both?
I don't know. I've never.
I speak about 5 languages, but English is my main language.
I don't even know if there's words in my dreams. Like, I remember visuals, but
And
I
do
never
you
remember words.
dream in black and white or color?
I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Because I'm also a painter.
I'm sleeping at that time. I really don't know what's going on.
You don't dream then?
I do.
Yeah.
Those letters are full of dreams that I've dreamt. The ones at the bookstore.
And I like the fact that typewritten letters.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're much better. Thank you for a wonderful conference.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm really sorry, but I'm being told that we have to leave. We have to close.
It's 8 p.m.
It makes sense. We are all
Absolute
very
sense.
tired, but thank you so much, and thank you so much, Rabbya. Just a brief reminder, Rabbya's intervention in this bookstore is in the center of Lisbon, in the Chiado. It's the Sistema Solar Assírio e Alvim. And maybe you get there and there are still some letters to take. I'm not sure about that. Either you will see some letters or maybe you arrived too late. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And for all your presentations yesterday and today, I am full of notes that I'm taking away with me. I was continuously inspired. There's so much to sort of reflect on when I go back. So thank you.
And also, in the name of all the organizers, Liliana, Bruno, Claudia, and Fernando, who is not here anymore, we would like to thank you all very much for being with us, for sharing your ideas, your energy, your intimacy as well sometimes. And it has been a very, very rewarding and interesting event for us. And I hope we will keep in touch. Thank you so much.